Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Big Questions, Small Steps. My name is Amanda and I'm glad that you could join me today. Today we're going to talk about oral law and we're going to look at if Christianity even has anything like that. This episode is coming at a request from my amazing boyfriend. We were talking about Jewish traditions and how they have the Torah, which is their written law, and then they have this oral law that helps them understand the Torah and informs how they practice. And he was very inquisitive about, well, what are the Christian oral laws or oral traditions? And I decided that we were going to make a video about it to talk about that, because maybe you are Christian by birth or growing up and you aren't necessarily aware of the oral traditions. Or maybe you are Christian and you are doing all these oral traditions and you just don't realize they're oral traditions. Or maybe you know nothing of Christianity and you had the same questions that he did. Either way, welcome and enjoy the journey. Today we're going to talk about Christianity and the oral traditions. Okay? Great. So, oral traditions are basically a companion to the written law or the written tradition. That would be the Bible in Christianity. So the Bible is supposed to be the guideline that you're following, and the oral tradition is everything else that religion does, but it's not written in the Bible. Okay? So basically, if you remember back, when Jesus was alive, nobody was writing down what was going on. They focus a lot on the parables that he told, and they use a lot of stories to tell different meanings. And the first time anything was actually written down was between 30 and 60 years after Jesus was dead. So basically, the stories that were being told are stories that apparently happened when Jesus was alive, and different things that the Christian traditions now do are to give nod to some of those practices or to remember some practices or whatever. We're going to talk about all of them in a little bit, but just if you're struggling with oral tradition and what it is, remember there's the written law in the Bible and there's the traditions that you just do as part of your beliefs, okay? So it's kind of been passed down like a game of telephone. So the stories that were transferred from generation to generation weren't perfect by any means. There are probably numerous errors in the traditions that have been passed down, but the traditions, by and large, are what make Christianity. It's their traditions and how they remember Jesus and his life that really makes them that tradition. Okay, so let's talk about some of them. We are going to talk about 9. Okay, 9 major traditions that are in Christianity. Now, every denomination within Christianity celebrates or recognizes these traditions in slightly different fashions. So I'm going to be honest and let you know that most of what I'm going to say is from my experience in the United Church of Christ. And if I know of traditions and understand traditions of other denominations, I'll share that as well. But I don't want to misrepresent anyone, okay? So let's start off strong with baptism. Baptism is not in the Bible. In the Bible, it does have a story of John the Baptist and that he baptized Jesus, and in that story, he took him into the river and he dunked him. And then when he came out, a dove descended from heaven, and there was a voice that said, "This is my son with whom I am well pleased." And that was about all that we know about it. We know John the Baptist was the most prominent person that was known to baptize people. We know that after Jesus was baptized, more people were baptized, but we don't know exactly how. Okay? So baptism within Christianity is a nod to that story. They look at that baptism with water as a mark of God is claiming them as well. So when Jesus was dunked in the water, his dove descended and said, "This is my son with whom I am well pleased." By baptism in Christianity, you're doing a mark and acceptance that God claims your soul. Okay? There's differences in the denominations, whether it's an infant baptism, whether it's an adult baptism, who can be there? Do you need godparents? Do you not need godparents? Those are all differences within the denominations. Typically, in Christianity, a godparent of some sort is incorporated. It used to be that the godparent had like legal obligations to the child that was their godson or daughter. If the parents passed away, that they would take them. That's not the case anymore. They're just supposed to be another supportive person. So it could be an aunt or an uncle or a cousin or somebody that their parents know, that they deem as a good person. Okay? In the United Church of Christ that I belong to, when you are baptized, you are called up to the front of the church during the service, and you have your parents with you and you have your godparents with you, and the priest or the pastor asks the parents and godparents questions as far as like, what is your belief? What is your intent? Do you promise to raise this child to know and love God and Jesus as their Savior? And then if they say yes, then they do, again, different by denominations, but they either will sprinkle water in the sign of a cross on their head, or they'll pour water over the top of their head, or in some, they'll do a full submersion. Not that they're holding babies under the water, but they'll do like a quick dip of the head, feet. It's different by every denomination. And then in the Baptist denomination, they will do a full submersion. Different interpretations. But baptism is supposed to be a nod to John the Baptist when he baptized Jesus, and giving that symbol that God is claiming your soul. Okay? Now, let's move on to another sacrament that is completed by most of Christianity, and that's confirmation. Confirmation is pretty much the mark of your adulthood and acceptance into the church. Before confirmation, you're not necessarily required to give an offering. You don't have voting rights. You like stuff like that. When you are confirmed, it's basically taking the vows that were spoken for you at your baptism, and you are now owning it. So if you have adult baptism, like in the Baptist church, they don't have confirmation, because confirmation is just you taking responsibility for the things that were spoken for you at baptism. Typically, there is some classes that you have to take. Some have a 1-year program, some have 2 or 4 years. In the Catholic faith, you actually start confirmation when you're part of Sunday school, and there's things in the Catholic faith that you'll learn as far as their history throughout the whole time, and then they don't get confirmed until they're either a junior or typically a junior. in high school. So that's like 17 years-ish. And that's a long time. The thought is between baptism and confirmation, there's that switch of your parents speaking and doing everything for you and you owning your relationship and your experiences. The more you know, the more you're supposed to be able to take control of that. So baptism and confirmation kind of go hand in hand in that regard as far as oral tradition. In most Christian churches, if you are not confirmed, you don't have voting rights. That's just how it works. Sometimes they will not count you as part of their members if you're not confirmed. My experience in Christianity and in teaching confirmation is a lot of kids are going through the motions in Christianity, and they're quite honestly they're not in the headspace to make that decision because they're still teenagers. They don't fully understand what they're agreeing to, and from 13 to 17 to 25, they're going to change drastically because that's just part of life. They're going to have new experiences and they're going to have different ways of thinking, and they may or may not be active in the church anymore. They may go to a different church, and that's just fine. But there's a lot of growth that happens, and I have had students who were confirmed when they were 16, and I had students that were confirmed when they were in 8th grade, and I don't necessarily know that there was that significant of a difference for me personally. If they're going to claim God as their God, if they're going to claim Jesus as their Savior, they're going to do that before they start confirmation, me personally. Now, if you choose to get confirmed and your denomination, practices confirmation, typically you'll have a big celebration party because it's kind of like a coming of age, equivalent to a quinceañera or a bar or bat mitzvah. It's a coming of age, recognizing that you are now an adult member of the church. You are now taking ownership of your connection with God. So, unfortunately, after many people are confirmed, they typically go away from the church for a while because they're kind of churched out, and they'll typically by trend return approximately when they get married and or when they have kids. That's just what they tend to do. The next one, we're going to start talking now about seasons within the church and how they came to be, because none of these, again, are in the Bible. These are all just oral traditions and how we celebrate it. So let's start with Lent. Okay, so Lent is a 40-day period, starts with Ash Wednesday, and it ends on Easter. It's a 40-day period preparing for Easter. Easter is the resurrection of Jesus, and Lent is meant to be like a preparation period for that. Knowing that people in general are kind of slow learners and we don't like to focus on the negative sometimes, Lent is a time where oral tradition has that you're supposed to take kind of checks and balance of your life and see what you can give up, or perhaps you're going to take on additional things to help understand in some small way the sacrifice that Jesus gave with his life. So in the Catholic faith, for example, everyone on Friday only eats fish. There is thoughts that it was because the Pope said it was only going to be fish on Fridays to help alleviate the cost burdens for families. Some say it was fish on Fridays because fish are cold-blooded animals, whereas Jesus is a warm-blooded animal. So it's that difference to help separate that in your mind. Food aside, typically during Lent, you either give something up to practice understanding that little bit of awareness as to what God gave up by killing his son, or what Jesus gave up by giving his life. Or they'll do something extra if that makes more sense for them. Whether they choose to, I remember one year I chose to, instead of take the elevator to my classes in college, I took the stairs every day. That was just something extra I did. Some people will do like a devotional during Lent. Many churches will have extra services during the week for Lent. And so they'll have it's called a Lenten workshop, and they'll come and they'll have focuses on different things. So their thing might be going to an extra worship service or doing some active service. My confirmation classes, sometimes we would have service Sundays, and we would make toys for the Humane Society, or we would build birdhouses for Habitat for Humanity to have as decorations at their new houses. Or there was a women's group that made quilts for kids that were in foster care and things like that as well. And different things to give your time essentially for a greater good and for somebody else that might need it. But Lent is that time period where you are supposed to give up something or pick something else up to remind you of what Jesus is giving up, what God is giving up, because that's important for them. And it's not necessarily a joyous thing. People aren't super excited about Lent because it's not a happy time. However, on the flip side, when it comes to Easter, so Lent leads up to Easter. Easter is a very joyful time in the Christian tradition. That's the day where they recognize Jesus rising from the grave. They know that Jesus has to die for the sins of the world to be saved. And on Easter, it just shows his enormous power. And it really confirms to the Christian people that he is not just a man. He is beyond what men can do. He is on a higher level. Okay, so on Easter, there are typically a lot of tulips and lilies and, I'm picturing the flower and I can't remember the name of it. But Easter lilies are the most prevalent. Tulips would be the second most prevalent. I can't remember what the third one is called, but I'm picturing it. I'm sure you'll figure it out. Typically, there's a lot of flowers, and the flowers that are popular on Easter start as a bulb. So when you plant that bulb, it looks kind of like a dead seed to remember that Jesus was dead, and then from that came something beautiful and awesome, that he rose from the dead. So the flowers for Easter are tied to that. Now, Easter bunny is a little bit trickier of a tie. It's more of a commercial thing. But when I was teaching Sunday school, I would tell the kids that the Easter bunny was kind of like God. That he was bringing surprises, aka Jesus, and you had to look for them because they're not always easy to find. Sometimes it's going to be a little bit tricky. Sometimes you can't see Jesus. Sometimes you don't understand what he's doing, but he's bringing good things. So the Easter bunny was bringing good things. God brought Jesus. That's the connection I helped them make for Easter. Now, there are jelly beans, and there's different reasonings as to why they have jelly beans. Typically, they will equate the colors of the jelly beans to mean different things. So like purple is for royalty because Jesus was a king. White is for purity because Jesus was pure and he had no sins. Black was for the the death that he had and the evil that surrounds us all. Red was for the blood that was shed when he was crucified, and on and on and on. That's the jelly bean equivalent for Easter. Now, my amazing boyfriend seems to think that Peeps are part of the oral tradition for Easter. They're not. They're just not. It's a food that some people very much like and some people don't like at all. There's no Christian connection. They are in the shape of chicks or bunnies because chicks and bunnies happen to be born around Easter, and it's a very spring-like thing. But yeah, there's no oral tradition regarding Peeps. Sorry, babe. So that is Easter. There will be changing of colors as well throughout the church, and that helps the church family, the congregation, realize the time changes throughout the year. That also is part of the oral tradition, that in Lent, for example, the colors will change to purple because purple is a sign of royalty and new birth and things like that. You'll see a lot of butterflies as well. That idea of what once was dead is now something beautiful, like the flower. Okay? That just is a direct correlation to Easter in the Christian tradition. The next one is my favorite. The next one is Advent. Advent is 4 weeks prior to Christmas. Again, this is an oral tradition. There is nothing in the Bible about Advent. There is nothing in the Bible about how to celebrate Advent or how to celebrate Christmas. But there is stories about waiting, that the angel came to Mary and she was told that there is this baby in her womb and that all these different things are going to happen, and she was worried and she was fretful and she didn't know exactly what to do, but she had to wait and trust that everything would work out okay. So in Advent, it's basically the church preparing for Christmas, and I believe that Advent was kind of created to help the Christian people focus not just on the busyness that is life, but also to bring back that religious component, that purposeful waiting and preparation and anticipation for something coming. Because otherwise you'll just get busy with all the details of, oh, I have to make a gingerbread house, and oh, I'm going to do this, and oh, I'm going to do that. And you'll forget what you're preparing for. Does that make sense? Because Christmas is a big holiday for Christians. It's typically Christmas and Easter that are the big ones. And most people would probably say Christmas is preferred over Easter, but both of them are equally big. But Advent was always my favorite because there is this season of waiting and that growing anticipation. So for the churches, what they will typically do for Advent is there will be an Advent wreath. It's typically 4 candles, and then there's 1 candle on the inside. And when they light each of the candle, it's supposed to help you focus on that trait or that skill or whatever you want to call it. So like one is hope, one is love, one is peace, one is joy. And you'll focus on different joys in your life or sharing the joy with others. What do you hope for? What do you hope to bring into this world? Like different things like that. And there'll be scripture passages that they will read along with it, just to kind of help you focus a little bit more. But that's Advent. It's nothing big or elaborate. It's that drawing in to help you remember that something big and exciting is going to happen. Okay? Then comes Christmas. And in Christmas, there are tons of oral traditions. There is most common in the church There is a nativity, which is the manger scene with the stable and the animals and Mary and Joseph and all those different figurines. Some churches actually will slowly build their nativity scene during Advent to also help with that anticipation of what's to come. Different traditions. In the church that I was part of, we had, again, What's in the Box, which was basically just a big present wrapped up for the kids, and they could do certain steps along the way before they could actually open it and find out what's inside. And as a child, that's antagonizing to the nth degree. But as I got older, I really liked the correlation, because kids don't really care about candles unless they're on their birthday cake. So moving to the What's in the Box helped them understand a little bit more about building that anticipation. And that was pretty awesome. So on Christmas, there's a nativity. There's typically a tree, a Christmas tree. Again, no written tradition about what Christmas is, no declaration that on Jesus' birthday, that is Christmas. Nothing in the Bible that says that. This is all oral tradition, what we do. The Christmas tree starts many different varieties. Some say that it was a pagan thing, that they brought a tree in to remember that the trees were all dying. There's another one that said that the tree is brought in because a priest stopped a sacrifice that was underneath, that was going to happen underneath a tree, and then a tree resprouted and they brought it in. In my church that I was a part of, we were of German background, so we focused very heavily on the German tradition of the Christmas tree. And that is that everything has a reason and a symbol attached to it. So on top of the tree, for example, would either be a star or an angel. The star would be to remind you of the star that led everybody to Bethlehem, that went over the stable where Jesus was born, or an angel to remind you that the angel proclaimed the good news of Jesus's birth. Okay? And then there were lights on the Christmas tree. Again, in German tradition, there were actually candles placed on some of the branches, and the fire portion, my fire awareness part of my brain is like, ooh, that's a terrible idea. However, that's what they did back then. Typically now you would use electric lights, and they could be white or they could be colored, just to remind you of the light that Jesus brought to the world, that Jesus was the light of the world, and to bring bright into darkness, because it was in the middle of winter and it was dark, and Jesus was coming even when our world was dark. There were ornaments that were decorated on the tree, and the ornaments were supposed to help symbolize the many good gifts that Jesus was going to offer us. And then you would place gifts underneath, because just as God gave the gift of his son, we give gifts to others. And that's Christmas in a nutshell. There are other traditions that people do. There are going Christmas caroling, where you go to people's houses and you sing songs for them, and sometimes you sing well and sometimes you don't, and typically you bring cookies or a gift of some sort, just to share the joy of the season and bring light in a different way to other people's lives. There are people who make gingerbread houses, and that's, again, a nod to the German traditions, because they make gingerbread, and that's just something they do. And houses and decorated with candy, just like they decorate their houses. So they'll have like decorations on little yards, or they might decorate their trees outside, bringing light into the darkness of the world. That's how they celebrate Christmas. Again, oral tradition. None of this is in the Bible. How each person chooses to celebrate Christmas is completely their choice. In the Jehovah's Witness faith, they don't celebrate Christmas. They don't celebrate any of the holidays, with the exception of the day Jesus died. And they celebrate by going to service. That's it. That's how they celebrate. It's their tradition, and that's just fine. We have 3 more to talk about. The next one is the concept of tithing. Tithing is basically giving back a portion of what you have to the church. There is nothing in the Bible written specifically about tithing. There is portions of the Bible that say, like in your planted field, you should save the corners of the field for those that are hungry or in need, and they can eat from there. There are portions that say that you should give all that you can to the church and to God. There's nothing in there that says, okay, you need to spend 10% of your gross income, you need to donate back to the church. There's nothing in the Bible that says that. There are many different denominations that will strongly encourage that and would like to see more of an offering because they still have a building to maintain. They have staff to pay. They have all these different things, and they need to pay their bills somehow. So there is not necessarily a requirement of certain amounts. However, there is an anticipation that you should give back some way. So when I was a new teacher starting out, for example, I didn't have income to spare. So I gave the gift of my time, and I taught Sunday school, and I taught Vacation Bible School, and I organized a lot of things. I did things like that to give back to the church so that while I couldn't do a financial donation, I could take workload off of anyone else who may be getting a paycheck so that they wouldn't have to work as hard doing everything. But that's tithing. That's tithing. There are some churches who are more stringent about it, and there are some that aren't. There are some that will pass an offering plate around as part of their service and then have the offerings brought up to the altar and blessed. Kind of a nod to when they used to do sacrifices or burnt offerings to God. They'll do similar things like that to bless it. The next one that we're going to talk about is specific to Catholics, and that's genuflecting. Genuflecting is the tradition of when you walk into the sanctuary space, before you sit, you do kind of like a kneel, but it's only on one leg. So you just bend one leg down and you do the sign of the cross. That is supposed to symbolize your humility and that you recognize that God is over you. God is more powerful than you. And you make the sign of the cross to bring Jesus closer to you. It's just that tradition of remembering who you are and where you are in the lineup, essentially. Okay? And the last one we're going to talk about is the concept of the devil. I know. So there are passages in Revelations, the book of Revelations, that talk a little bit about the devil and that he might have horns or he is serpent-like or things like that. But there's not a set story as to how the devil came to be, and that changes by denomination. So I'm going to share with you the oral tradition that I received regarding the devil and how hell came to be. Okay, so basically the story that I was taught was God made heaven. There was just a place called heaven, and there were all these angels, and there was one angel named Lucifer that he sent down for a mission. At that time, all the angels had free will, and God sent this angel down to have a mission. What the mission was, I don't know. But he sent him down, had this mission, and basically when he was down here, he got tempted by all the free choices and all the opportunities that were in the world. And he basically said, I don't want to do the mission anymore. And God called him back up to heaven and said, You didn't follow what I wanted you to do. You can't come to heaven anymore. And he basically pushed him to hell. Hell was a place. Nobody was there. Lucifer went to hell, and then he kind of was the director of hell, if you want to call it that. And then the angels after that time didn't have free choice anymore. They were just instantly obeying God. And it was basically the people of earth still had free choice. And depending on what their choices were, the devil would constantly tempt them to do bad things or not good things or whatever you want to call it. And then at the end of their life, there was that time where God would determine, were they a good enough person to go to heaven, or were they going to go down to hell because of all of their temptations? That's just my understanding of the devil and how it came to be. Again, I'm not claiming that I'm right, just my interpretation from the oral tradition that I was taught. It was very interesting to me to learn that a lot of these things that I've done are oral traditions. I quite honestly just thought that they were things that we did because that's just what you did. But the idea that they're all oral traditions and they had meaning, that was enlightening for me. And the idea that all these oral traditions were helping to tell different stories that at one time were passed down from when Jesus was alive and around, that meant more to me. So just interesting about the oral traditions in Christianity. Next up, we're going to talk a little bit about oral tradition in Judaism and why it's slightly different and why it's needed in Judaism. Okay? I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.